Bienvenidos de nuevo. Espero
Welcome back. I hope you're all ready. I'll now give you the results of the poll that took place yesterday. The first one regarding the election of members for the Commission on the resolutions and also approved, and the vote for the agenda was also approved, and the vote on the regulation was also approved. The second vote of yesterday was motion 1A, which was also approved. The vote on the budget was also approved, and the third vote in the afternoon was about the quota, which was also approved. The fourth vote was motion 5 for the modification of the statutes of Union Europa, and the composition of the executive committee was equally approved. The vote on motion number 6 on equal representation was also approved, and the vote on the declaration for strengthening trade union movement in Europe was also approved. The resolutions that were submitted yesterday were all approved, so we can carry on. Meanwhile, we can now move on to the emergency motion. We'd like to invite all delegates to take part in the interactive journey that you can find on the platform by clicking on your COVID-19 journey. The central focus of this is essential workers, many of which are affiliated to the Union Europa sectors. I'd like to invite you to take part to the other poll on Slido. What other aspects of COVID-19 have affected services workers? While you reply on Slido, and I hope most of you do so, we're going to give the floor to our colleague, Erwin de Deen, for him to present the recommendations of the Committee of Resolutions. Erwin, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Pilar. Chers collègues, cette motion...
Thank you, Pilar. Dear colleagues, this motion reflects the crisis of our times, a critical change, a rupture that is in the fabric of our societies and reveals the precariousness of our times workers. The emergency motion was proposed by the Executive Committee and was based on the political statement on COVID-19 adopted by the Executive Committee in October 2020. The motion's objective is to define a clear course of action for Union Europa as a collective and its affiliates. Where services workers across the labour market have been imperative to the continued functioning of societies everywhere, it has also become clear that services workers need recognition and need a voice. Therefore, if this motion is accepted, Union Europa will set out to fight for national recovery packages and public investment that benefit the sector, to revalue essential workers, to combat the structural inequalities that are harmful to various types of workers, whether because of their contract types or their identity, to address the challenges of the accelerated restructuring processes, including remote working, counter online platform giants who abuse of the COVID-19 crisis, among which are Amazon. Fight for the COVID-19 vaccines to be extended to all workers, strengthen sectoral social dialogue, and finally, to work closely together to secure an inclusive transition from lockdown and the pandemic situation back to normal, or what may become the new normal. The Resolutions Committee recommends the adoption of this motion. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Erwin. We can now move on to our next speaker, Jesus Antonio Fernandez Bejar from the Federation of Builders and Services in Spain, CCO, who will talk about essential workers. Jesus, over to you.
Hola, buenos días. Un cordial
Good morning,
saludo.
everybody. A very warm welcome from Comisiones Obreras and Building and Services in Spain. The pandemic has highlighted the condition of essential workers conducting their work in cleaning service and so on. As part of the public services, they have and always been and will always be essential, particularly in times of crisis. They are an essential part of society, not only when it comes to healthcare, but in industry, transport, and life in general. At the same time, they are amongst the collective group that is worst paid and amongst the most precarious in Europe. 2 million euros are used for public services in Europe, and this money should play an important role in improving the working conditions of the professionals in these sectors. On the contrary, the public services sector is such that there has been a worsening in working conditions with a lowering of wages and worse labor conditions. Our aim is not to worsen conditions and decrease salaries. We seem to have forgotten the importance of these workers, and we have been witnessing a difficulty for these people to access vaccines. It's unfair that workers who have been and carry on being on the front line and suffer the same risks as sanitary personnel and healthcare workers are not acknowledged their rights. The pandemic has also revealed that the obsession in reducing costs has promoted a reduction in personnel more than any time before by increasing their workload, which also multiplies risks. The workers in the healthcare service and cleaning services have been putting their lives at risk to keep our societies working. They are the first barrier to protect us against the virus. If they have had more voices and more protective equipment, more security and safety protocols, if they had more personnel and reduced workload, they certainly would have been able to save more lives and their lives would have been saved. We recognize their efforts, we clapped them, and we now need to move forwards and afford them better working conditions and wages that are right and dignified. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus. We now have the pleasure to introduce Luca Visentini, General Secretary of the ETUC. Luca, it's a great pleasure to have you here today at Uni Europa. You have the floor.
Good morning, everybody, colleagues and friends, comrades of Uni. I'm really happy to address your Congress today on behalf of the European Trade Union Confederation. And I'm particularly happy also because Uni is my federation of origin before being General Secretary of the ETUC and of my own union. I was very active in your sectors in my trade union career. And I'm also happy because today is a very important day for the European and global trade union movement. It's the International Workers' Memorial Day. And this day, this year gets a particularly additional importance, I will say, because we are still, unfortunately, in the middle of the COVID outbreak, and health and safety and protection of workers in the workplace and also outside the workplace in situations of telework became increasingly important during this terrible pandemic. Health and safety conditions for workers have deteriorated significantly, but at the same time, because of the action of the trade union movement everywhere, we we have made possible to protect workers also during this very difficult situation with the confinement and the lockdowns. And many unions in many countries have realized important agreements for protection of health and safety during the lockdown. Health and safety becomes crucial because of COVID. And at the moment, we are also very active in important campaigns to get vaccines for everybody. Accelerating vaccination is crucial to make sure that we can get out from this situation. We can rebuild the trust, we can recover our economies, and particularly we can get the jobs back to normal. Universal access to vaccines, free of charge for everybody, giving priority for essential workers and workers in the forefront is really crucial for us and is at the core of our campaigns. And we are also insisting about the fact that it's unacceptable that multinational companies in the pharmaceutical sector make excessive profits out of vaccinations. It's absolutely essential to waive the patents, to have a derogation of the TRIPS agreements in the global dimension to make sure that vaccines can be provided to everybody for free as soon as possible. And there is also, of course, an employment emergency going on before us of COVID. We have seen almost 20 million jobs destroyed in the European Union and in the European continent more in general because of the outbreak. And we have almost 40 million workers that are at the moment suspended from work because of the pandemic. Fortunately, also thanks to the action of the trade unions, but we have also to say thanks to the intervention of the European Union with some solidarity finally after years of austerity. We have some employment protection and emergency measures in place, making sure that most of these workers receive some income compensation. But of course, it is not enough. It's not enough because the compensation is not sufficient. It's not enough because many categories of workers are excluded. Non-standard workers, platform workers, self-employed, precarious workers, particularly in your sectors, have not been reached by these emergency measures. So we are insisting, campaigning, having actions on the ground in each and every country to make sure that all workers can be protected properly and also that the emergency measures can be prolonged until this situation will be overcome, that everybody will really not be left behind. But of course, at the same time, we need also to plan the recovery. We need to design a recovery that can be very inclusive, where everybody is reached by positive measures, where everybody can be offered a decent opportunity for a quality job. This is true for those that are at risk of losing their jobs. This is particularly true, of course, for those that have lost their jobs. The recovery plans that the European member states have to put in place by the end of this week, by the way, have absolutely to have at the core of the investment strategy job creation, quality job creation. Not any job is enough. We need to create decent jobs opportunities for all. And we have to make sure particularly that we can manage those transitions that will happen, that are already happening in the climate sense, but also in sense of digitalization, automation, and other transformation and restructuring processes that are happening in the different sectors, including yours. It's absolutely necessary that a just transition is in place. And just transition cannot only be training. We cannot train and retrain unemployed people, leaving them in unemployment or just providing them with precarious opportunities for jobs. We have to make sure that just transition really means governance processes, investment for job creation, and better working and living conditions for all. But recovery must be also strengthening public services, strengthening social protection systems, making sure that through the recovery plans, we can rebuild our social economic model in Europe, our European social model, and this is a battle on which we are really committed. All this requires a strong involvement of social partners at all levels, and unfortunately we have to say that not all the member states, not all the governments are properly involving social partners and trade unions in particular in the design and implementation of their recovery strategies. This is essential. We have to continue the fight to make sure that we are at the core of the recovery, that we can have a strong social dimension in this respect, that we can make sure that trade unions are protagonists of these processes through social dialogue, through collective bargaining, through workers' participation paths. And in this respect, recovery must be also a challenge to make sure that we don't just come back to business as usual. We have to build a different economic model. We have to reform the fiscal rules and the economic governance of the European Union. We have to stop austerity. We have to make sure that the economy we will rebuild after this pandemic crisis will be really a fair and just economy, an economy that takes care of people, that really provides better living and working conditions for all. And to do so is not enough to have slogans, it's not enough to change the narrative, it's important to have decisions, different decisions that really make a change in comparison to the past. And this is also the challenge we will be discussing in few days in Porto, in this very relevant social summit promoted by the European and national institutions, where social partners will have an active role pushing for a real implementation of the 20 principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights in practice. And in this respect, again, it's not only about slogans, it's not only about propaganda, it's about concrete action. Concrete action means action on the ground, action on national level, actions in the sectors, but it means also improving the European legislation. And we have at the moment important initiatives going on. The first one is, of course, this proposal for a directive for fair minimum wages and stronger collective bargaining. We are really committed to make sure that this directive will realize some of the objectives that you have put at the core of your discussion in your Congress, that is how to strengthen collective bargaining everywhere in Europe, in each and every country, in each and every sector, making sure that workers can really gain stronger power to defend themselves through their trade unions. But there are also other things we need to do. We need to achieve gender parity in terms of pay, but also in terms of non-discrimination, of working conditions. We need to eliminate any other kind of discrimination and inequality in the world of work. And in this respect, other legislative initiatives that are going on for pay transparency, but also for protecting platform work, to eliminate the harm that competition law very often introduces for precarious platform, non-standard and self-employed workers that don't have access to collective bargaining in a proper way. We need to eliminate all these obstacles. We need to make sure that companies take their own responsibility in the social sphere, and that we can really ensure better working and living conditions for all. These are our challenges at the time of COVID, but also in general for the future. We need really to build a better Europe for everybody, a better social model for everybody, protection and rights for all. These are our commitments. We are struggling for that. We are together in this fight, and we know that we can count on each other in solidarity. The ETUC can count on UNI, UNI can count on the ETUC. We will win together. Thank you very much again for having me with you today, and really have a great Congress with great results.
Muchas gracias a ti, Luca, por tu
Thank you very much, Luca, for your contribution. We now give the floor to Paddy Lillis, the General Secretary of USDAV. You now have the floor.
Good morning, President, Congress. I'm speaking in support of the emergency motion on COVID-19 crisis. Colleagues, if we were to go back in time 18 months, to November 2019, would we ever have been able to predict the world we live in now? In such a short time, our world and our worldview has changed almost beyond recognition. The devastating impact of the COVID-19 crisis has been felt across every sector of the economy, and none more so than in the retail side. While supermarkets and grocery retail have remained open throughout the crisis, non-essential retail has had a different case. While our challenges in supermarkets has been about protecting staff and keeping them safe at work, for our members in non-food and fashion retail, the challenge has been protecting jobs. Many non-essential stores were told to close to prevent the spread of the virus. And in the UK, workers' pay was protected by the job retention scheme, which unions fought hard for. But as we begin to come out of our third lockdown, many don't have a job to go back to, and many more are fearful of what comes next. Retail was already in difficulty before the pandemic struck. We have seen a gradual trickle away from our high streets over the last 10 years or so, as online retail has increased. It is an issue Usdaw has campaigned on in the past and will continue to campaign on. But what was once a trickle away from our town and city centres has seen a massive move away from bricks and mortar retailers to an online platforms. And what was already a major concern before COVID is now an emergency. In the United Kingdom this year alone, more than 20,000 retail workers have been made redundant. That's on top of the 180,000 jobs in 2020. It is projected that by the end of this year, there will be around 400,000 jobs lost in the 24 months in the retail sector alone. The crisis that we face has now reached a tipping point. If we allow the retail sector to descend further down the road, we may not be able to pull it back. The fate of thousands of workers is precarious. But one thing the coronavirus has taught us is that no challenge is insurmountable. There are always things that can be done to support people and business, even during the deepest crisis. Usdaw believes there are some practical measures that could have significant impact in the recovery for the high streets. Our retail recovery plan would tackle business rates and rents so that bricks and mortar retailers are on a level playing field with the online retailers. Colleagues, we also need to make sure that the online retailers are paying their fair share of tax in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And most of all, we need governments who will engage with local authorities, unions, and the shop workers themselves, so that the recovery is worker-centred and worker-led. If we want to see some good that has come out of the pandemic, with all its tragedy and suffering, it's that the value of essential workers has been redefined in the minds of the public. And we must use that understanding to build a better future, especially on this day, International Workers' Memorial Day, with proper investment and policy to back up the regrowth. Now is our chance to make sure that the true value of workers is not forgotten, with pay and conditions that reflect the work they do. Now is our chance to make sure that the trade unions here today have a stake in the regrowth on behalf of their members. Conference, I urge you to support the motion. Thank you for listening.
Thank
you, Paddy, for this interesting contribution, which was also substantial in its content. We now have Michael Buldorfen from the Financial Trade Union in Denmark, who will be talking to us about remote work. You have the floor.
Thank you for inviting me to speak about the transition to remote working in the light of the COVID crisis, but perhaps even more looking ahead into what could be waiting for our members in the future and the vital role we as trade unions have to play here. As president of Europa Finance, of course, my background and knowledge comes primarily from finance, but I'm sure that most of you will actually recognize the framework and the dilemmas I'm going to address. If anything, the COVID crisis has clearly shown the importance of service workers. And even more, it has shown the responsibility that service workers have taken during these many months. Our members are frontline workers as well. Healthcare workers have my full respect. They are really the heroes of our time, but really, so are the tellers in the supermarket. And so is the private advisor in the savings banks. I could mention a lot of examples, for they are countless. The heroes are not only frontline workers, because so many of our members have been forced to working from home, from their living room, basement, kitchen, bedroom, basically from everywhere, sitting on a bad chair, using own internet and having insufficient equipment, just taking a huge responsibility for their work, their customers, their production. They deserve respect, and they do deserve better working conditions. I know that the situation differs from sector to sector, from country to country, but let me tell you about the conclusions we have seen in my union from our 3 member surveys during the lockdown. The most important conclusion is, not surprisingly, that workers thrive when they are set free, when they are empowered to take responsibility for their own working life, if they experience flexibility. For instance, to start working earlier, to take a 3-hour break during lunchtime, to decide to work more one day and less the other day. We see that stress is reduced by 60% and that well-being has increased by 50%, while at the same time productivity has increased. So what's not to like? The second important conclusion is that if you work from home 100%, a large group of the employees starts feeling isolated and lonely, and they miss their colleagues and their customers. This isolated group has a stress level 2.5 times higher than the rest, and the well-being is down to 20% of the other workers. Think about it. These 2 basic facts are really a gift for our employers. We know for a fact, and we actually do agree with the employers, that well-being at work and low stress levels give a higher productivity. So, besides doing the right thing, this is also profitable. It doesn't cost anything to make agreements with the trade unions to empower workers. It doesn't cost anything to work with workplace communities, giving both the right to disconnect, but also the right for the worker to be present at the workplace. I call on the employers to step into the new world of work as it should be, where they engage in collective bargaining, setting the framework for flexible working conditions on workers' terms, where they acknowledge workers' communities instead of plain assembly line thinking, where they demonstrate the good learning from the COVID crisis and acknowledge trade unions and collective bargaining as the conditions for sustainable companies and sustainable growth. My friend, my fellow trade unionists, I look forward to discussing this with you, and I really look forward to be working with you in the new world of work as it will be. Thank you for letting me speak. Have a good conference. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much
Thank you, Michael,
for
this interesting contribution, and we shall carry on
continue to push ahead together
to try and achieve
and preserve improvements for workers. Now we're going to be listening to Barbara Taibe from Austria. Barbara, over to you when you're ready. Dear colleagues, the coronavirus pandemic has really caused an abrupt upheaval in all our lives. And we, as trade unions, have done everything within our power from the outset to cushion the blow of this crisis on workers. We negotiated short-time working arrangements across Europe and saved tens of thousands of jobs in the process. We fought for protective measures at company and sector level. We advised many of our members in difficult situations. We made sure that the law was adhered to, even in times of crisis, because the crisis cannot be tantamount to a permit for exploitation. What we have also seen is that a lot of money is now being spent everywhere to mitigate the impact of the crisis. A lot of money. That's right and important, because in the past, we experienced a saving fury. Cuts were made to the healthcare systems, in the healthcare sector in particular. And I am sure that had there not been this type of austerity, we would have come through the crisis better. Had national governments invested money in our healthcare systems, in more staff, in better working conditions, we would have managed many things better. And we must learn from this situation. Now, this begs the question, who's going to pay for the cost of the crisis? And we, as a trade union movement, must make sure that it is not the workers who bear the financial brunt of this crisis. That is why we have started a campaign at the GPA under the slogan, "We're not paying for this crisis. Millionaire taxes now." Because our concern is that often the super rich and online giants like Amazon, for instance, have to pay a contribution to our society, Austria. Pay inequality is a major problem here. In our country, 1% of the population owns 40% of the wealth in terms of tax revenue. If we look a little bit closer at it, there is only 1.3% wealth-related tax, as opposed to 80% of the taxes that are paid by workers and consumers. That has to change. At least that's what we have to learn from the crisis. It is simply a matter of getting more people to make a fair contribution. We have a lot to do as a trade union movement, especially now. We must also exert pressure so that plans are finally put on the table and action is taken for a strong Europe. We are currently lagging behind here in Europe vis-à-vis other power blocks who are investing huge amounts of money in investment projects at an unprecedented scale. The US is currently demonstrating this to us. Europe has some catching up to do. What we have to do is rethink now and after the crisis, rethink politics and society. The economy must change as well. Lessons must be learned from the crisis, because it's all about fighting for a fair, mutually supportive, equal society. For a society where all workers have a right to collective agreements. We still have a lot to do, and we have to fight for it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Barbara. And now, Dan Jackson from Unite the Union in the UK. Dan, you have the floor. And you'll be talking to us about organizing. Over to you. Dawn, sorry.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for letting me speak on this organising motion after missing this slot due to technical difficulties. Finance and legal sector companies in the UK are placing huge demands on workers with reducing pay and benefits, increased working time, requirement to be available to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, constant organisational change, and fears for job security. It is a scandal that many roles are paid not far from the UK minimum wage, yet companies still demand you're in early to prepare, unpaid. Scripts are provided to navigate calls. This must be done with word-perfect precision. How long you spend talking to customers and how long you aren't are all constantly analysed. If you don't achieve, you can be subject to disciplinary action at worst, and at best, named and shamed for your poor statistics. Absence is high, and cases of mental health issues are even higher. With pay freezes or low pay awards, workers are falling into poverty, with many relying on state handouts to enable them a basic standard of living. We even have workers relying on food banks to provide food and supplies for their family. With that background, recruitment and retention is difficult, with cost an issue. Many redundancies and high attrition make it harder to retain membership. During lockdown, it's proved even more difficult to identify new starters and recruit, as we only rely on workplaces to network and promote union membership. We must remind workers what a union is here for, the benefits of a union, and how working together makes us stronger. Unite the Union has a dedicated organising department, developing and trialling new ways to provide reps with the information that is key to support meaningful negotiations. It is called Work, Voice, Pay. Unite are aware that it is only by delivering at the workplace that we remain relevant to working people. And it is the success or failure at the bargaining table that Unite will be judged on. Unite fully support Uni's work in organising. We must continue to strive for a world where every worker is in a union and every workplace an organised workplace. Thank you.
Gracias a ti.
Thank you, Dawn. And we wish you every success, dear comrades from Unite the Union. Before starting the debate, I would like Jennifer to give us an interactive summary of our journey and read out some tweets. And I hope you've all been very active on Twitter and on the platform.
First of all, let us have a look here. We see on Twitter, following that hashtag UniEuropaFWD, we see here, pandemic has hastened the growth of remote work, and these principles ensure this development does not spur other trends: creation of precarious jobs, weakening of social protections, and the undermining of collective bargaining. Some good comments there. Now, staying with this theme, as we've just been talking about COVID-19, let me come back here to our hub and show you a little tool we have here. If you look here on the left, you will see a tab entitled Your COVID-19 Journey. So you click on that, and that will take you here to these tales of work during the pandemic. You have a couple of different languages there. So I'm going to choose English to make it easy for myself. And here we have Forward Through Collective Bargaining, the story of what's been happening for people during this COVID-19 pandemic. You can choose here different healthcare sector, retail sector, finance sector, different sectors there. You can follow Lisa's story, Agnieszka's story, or Eric's story. Let's have a look. And here we'll see a roadmap, a little tale of Eric's story in various points, telling you how this has worked out over the COVID-19 journey. And you can just click here on the arrow to start, and you will zoom in. It will tell you he's arrived at a small retail store, what's happening, what exactly this would entail, and what's happening with the virus. You can click through it. Next, what happens? Next, what happens? These are well worth following. They're great stories. As I say, there's quite a few. There's at least 3 there for different sectors. Follow those stories through. It just gives you a really nice hook to when you start to think about the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on the different sectors. Maybe check out sectors that are not ones you're so familiar with, just to broaden the scope of what we're talking about here. Now, another area where we can talk about is the COVID-19. We have this Right to Cure Citizens Initiative, which can be found down under here, under the Resource Centre, all the way down to the bottom of this left-hand tab. Here you go. You've got different petitions. There's Reclaim Your Face. There's one here is Right to Cure petition. You can sign that by clicking there on the document. It will take you off into a new tab where you can follow it all there. You can see it's all very straightforward. Click through, but that takes you away from our hub, and I do want to stay on our hub. But let me tell you about this Right to Cure Citizens Initiative. It's care workers on the front line, and it's about supporting them. So make sure you sign it. We will have more of these petitions for you coming through the afternoon. But now I will hand back to Pilar.
No, pues ya veo que estáis activos.
Well, I can see that you've all been very active, and that's great. Now we're going to listen to our comrades from the whole of Europe. The debate is open, and first we'll give the floor to Myriam Delmé from the SETCA in Belgium. After that, we'll be listening to Dave Ward from the CWE, Maria Grazia Gabriela from FILCAM, CGL, and Sébastien Buziris from the FECFO. We've received a lot of requests for the floor, so we're going to have to abridge things a little bit. You're limited to 2 minutes per contribution. We want there to be as many people whom we give an opportunity to speak. So please stick to your speaking slot. The sound, we have, okay. The comrades, of course, we're going to make a contribution about the coronavirus. I would like to thank Erwin de Dijn for his chairing of the Resolutions Committee and the work that he has done in the framework of this Congress. Collective bargaining is essential. It is our very foundation. We're at a turning point. If we want for society post-COVID to be different from the pre-COVID one, we have to change things now. Changing things now is bargaining. We set out power relations, but also to change the tools for collective bargaining in Europe, because otherwise we'll be subjected to these budgetary austere diktats. We have started a campaign on the post-COVID society that we want to carve out for ourselves. There's a little bit of a lag. At SETCA, a few months ago, we started a campaign on the post-COVID society that we want. It is going to be very difficult to change society if the right remains in the majority. It is our role as unions to explain and raise the awareness of our rank and file. Voting for the left or voting for the right is not the same thing. We have a lot of elections taking place in Europe in the weeks and months to come. It is up to us to convince people that if the right and the extreme right are in power, that is never going to lead to social progress. If we want to fight against social inequalities, the breeding ground for all extremes, we have to be present. We will be able to change things by communicating, by raising the awareness of our members, by fighting. We will do so that the rich who get even richer and the poor who are getting even poorer will only become words. We have the opportunity by fighting, by raising the awareness of politicians. All this is possible. Thank you, comrades. My connection isn't very good, but I wish you a very good conference.
Hi, Polly. Okay, President, sisters, brothers, Dave Ward from the Communication Workers Union in the United Kingdom to support the emergency motion. Unfortunately, we've all tragically lost members, friends, and some of us family members to this terrible global pandemic. And the CWU brings solidarity and our condolences to all unions and affiliates of UNI and delegates at this conference. In the context of this motion, the biggest single and overarching takeaway that we have from the pandemic is inequality. Although it's been decades in the making, we think it's fair to say that all of us now live in a more unequal world than at any point in our lifetimes. And there is a deep structural imbalance of power and wealth in the world of work, in how the economy operates, and in wider society. And the biggest challenge that faces everybody in the labour movement is, what are we going to do about that collectively? And I'm afraid that politicians, I do not believe, are going to be able to answer that call. They mostly do politics in their head, in theory. Trade unions can make change happen on the ground. That's our power, that's our collective strength. So we believe it's time for workers across Europe and across the world to harness that collective strength in a fight for a new deal for all working people. A deal where we challenge precarious and insecure employment models. A deal where we restore and enhance dignity, power, and reward.
A tutte le delegate e a tutti i delegati.
To all delegates, as far as we're concerned,
dear delegates, we have two priorities for the trade and retail sector that are facing
a situation that is still of an emergency type from an economic and social perspective. We must ensure safe and security, also by putting particular attention in managing the vaccination campaign for the many people that we represent, and that in the full of the pandemic have carried on working and guaranteeing fundamental activities for the economic and social activities of our communities. We then have to carry on in the months to come, as we have done in the past year, to safeguard work by promoting a recovery through measures that in Italy have been essential for workers, both men and women, by freezing layoffs and establishing a number of social benefits. Because of the dramatic crisis, this must also be considered an opportunity. Trying to define a new normal cannot be delayed any further in Italy and in Europe. In order to build a new social and economic model for FILCAMS and CGIL, we have three key words: sustainability, collective bargaining, and inclusiveness, which must be at the base of our work in safeguarding our workers' rights. Thank you.
Mes camarades, bonjour.
Comrades, hello. We will vote in favor of this emergency motion. We are in the throes of the pandemic here with more than 30,000 cases per day, more than 250 dead a day. We are experiencing our third lockdown. A lot of workers have lost their job and can't exercise their occupation as before. We have to demand protection measures through the mobilization of the trade unions and mobilization. We've been able to achieve measures. This pandemic has affected the world of work, and a lot of people say the world will be different. Yes, different because the pandemic has speeded up a lot of things, teleworking, furlough schemes, etc. But this must not happen to the detriment of what workers have acquired. Under the cover of this pandemic, a lot of rights have been put on hold. This cannot be a ticket for social regression. It is the most vulnerable populations that have been affected, the young, the poor, etc. They are the most affected. Social inequality is on the rise. The amount of billionaires and millionaires is also increasing. But you have more and more working poor. The 40 most important companies in France are going to hand out 51 billion worth in dividends. We have to demand a better world that is not worse than pre-pandemic. Let us get through this crisis by the increase in salaries, and we have to really recall how important our healthcare sector is. Let us work through unionization, the mobilization of workers, collective bargaining, and let us build together a different world, dear comrades.
Y ahora, Tommy
and
ya.
Now we'll hear from Sweden. Tommy, and we'll be hearing from Belgium as well. We'll from Belgium. Thank you very much.
Tommy Hägg from Handels. Hello, friends. My name is Tommy Hägg, and I'm from Handels in Sweden. We have had a small sort of reformation regarding the digitalization. We have all had to change our ways of working. Everything has become unclear. The need for skill development has increased a lot, and the knowledge of technicalities is really evident. It's increasing all the time. The digitalization must not become an instrument to increase inequalities. So we have to remember that even if the digitalization is a fact, the consequences are still very unclear. Our principles have not been changed, but the work has changed. We still want more jobs and equality. So it is our mission to fight for this together. We have to organize our members and look at the digitalization, because this is really important. And we have to examine actors like Amazon, because they are really important here. We must make sure all our members receive the skill development they need. We have to make sure that the working environment is safe. Thank you so much for listening.
Hallo. Ja, goeiedag collega's.
Hello, colleagues. BICV at ACV Pulse, we speak for the rights of services workers and also healthcare workers. And with them in my thoughts, I am making this contribution. No profit on the pandemic. Everybody deserves protection. COVID-19 is spreading fast and solutions must be even faster. We have to ascertain that the access to vaccines we're running the risk of citizens and countries being pitted against each other. The big pharma companies will set profit over anything else, any of the concerns of the world population, the investments of governments in R&D, energy, and open infrastructure in the training of workers contributes to the productiveness of these companies. A patent waiver on these vaccines is absolutely essential in order to give the world's population access to the vaccines, just like the polio vaccine at the time. Everybody will be a winner. We would like to ask Uni Europa, Uni Global, and all Uni members to ask and encourage its members to sign the European Citizens Initiative, no profit on the pandemic. And we also like to ask that unions see to it that the Commission does everything within its power to see to it that the vaccine is turned into a global good that is accessible to everybody. Thank you.
Bueno, pues ahora seguiría Guy Cohen.
Now we have Guy Cohen from Israel, and then Carles Català from Servicios Comisiones in Spain, Elizabeth Bran, and Regis Couchon from CGT France, Andre Borghesi as well from CGL in Italy. You have 2 minutes to come in.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Guy Cohen, and I'm a worker of the High-Tech Workers Union in Israel, part of the Histadrut, General Federation of Labor in Israel. Just like the rest of the world, the COVID-19 pandemic had a great influence on workers here in Israel. I would like to point out a few examples of the way our unions dealt with the new situation. Immediately after the lockdown started in mid-March 2020, a massive wave of layoffs was on its way. Most of the workers were laid off or put on an unpaid leave status, which allowed them to get some payment from the Israeli Social Security, but didn't require the employer to pay normal salaries. We began to notice that some employers were using this new and confusing situation to try and catch us off guard and make big budget cuts that were not possible before, even when it wasn't necessary. On several occasions, we stopped these attempts and didn't allow the employer to make those cuts. Another example of the power of unions came in several incidents where we managed to stop layoffs in return for agreed cuts on bonuses or certain percentage of the worker's salary. A great example of solidarity came in a company where the workers who weren't affected financially by the crisis transferred some of their paid sick days to the workers that were affected, thus creating a greater equality between the workers. We also transferred funds that were designated for welfare activities and used them for improved conditions for working from home, such as good office equipment, activities for workers, children, and more. In a general view, we can see that most of the workers who were impacted greatly by the crisis are young workers without major professional experience. They were the first to get laid off and probably the most likely to have a hard time finding new jobs. I think a great challenge for us after the crisis is taking care of those workers and helping them get back into the workplace.
Okay. Buenos días.
Good morning. A heartfelt greeting to all the participants in this conference. I wish to congratulate the comrades at Uni Europa for organizing this conference at a very difficult time for everybody, which is also a difficult time for the trade union movement. So organizing these conferences is particularly complicated. It's rather difficult and unusual to see each other through a screen. So we must congratulate our colleagues from Uni. Dear friends, I was going to repeat many of the things that have already been said, but we must recall the fact that the crisis, the confinement, and the problems posed by the pandemic has meant that the trade union work that is being carried out in our sectors and our international federations must be congratulated and acknowledged. But it's been more than that, it's been heroic. I wish for all our workers in banks, in supermarkets, in warehouses, all the sectors that we covered must be applauded. In any case, this has highlighted the fact that there is a massive deficit in many countries when it comes to preventative policies on the one hand, and on the other hand, respecting our objectives for the present and the future has becoming increasingly difficult when it comes to automation and digitalization. Many workers have been subjected to risks in their workplace and have been exposed to extremely long and tiring working days, not only in offices and warehouses, but also at home. In spite of all this, collective bargaining must give us answers in reply to the problems that we had already experienced and that have been exacerbated by the crisis.
Tack så mycket. Under coronapandemin så har
Thank you so much. During the pandemic, our main focus was to protect our members, that the working environment should be so good as possible and that all our members should have their economic security ensured. And now we have to restart society because the pandemic has led to great inequalities, and lots of our energies have had to have a good and fair market, and society must be green now because it is within our sectors that a change can be made. And the environmental challenge is really the sector where everybody is exposed. It is a union issue, and all our members have to deal with this issue. We at Handels in Sweden have prepared a program for the climate because it was one of the most important issues for our members, and we as a union have to be prominent in this. I'm not going to go through all the proposals, but I wanted to underline the competence, the skills, and all the qualities that our members have, and I'm sure your members have too. And we need an international trade union work in order to have this green transformation. So we have to do this together. Thank you so much.
Bonjour, salutations fraternelles des syndiqués CGT des activités postales et télécommunications.
Good morning, everybody. Greetings from CGT and the Postal Services. The COVID pandemic has highlighted the social, environmental, economic and digital fractures and chasms among the population in Europe. This crisis has highlighted the predominance of the capitalist system to the detriment of workers. It has favored populist, sexist movements and has also exacerbated mass redundancies. And this is why we must focus on taxing the rich at a global level. We need to carry on establishing moratoriums on collective redundancies and promote measures that will foster environmental and social policies. The reduction of the working time without loss of salary will allow everybody to work and will allow us to tackle the digital transition. Increasing wages by using the European minimum wage with a non-regressive clause and using the International Labour Organization conventions will allow us to guarantee decent working conditions, as highlighted in the guidelines by the ETUC. We must join the European Citizens Initiative to allow everybody to access vaccinations. So thank you for your attention.
Buongiorno a tutte e a tutti I congressisti.
Good morning, everybody, participants and delegates to this Congress. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak, even if it's just for a few minutes. We believe that the pandemic has objectively revealed the fragmentation in the labour market existing in Italy, but in Europe as a whole. And in this regard, trade unions have played a major role in requesting with the government, Italian government, for particular safeguards for workers who've been subjected to great difficulties during these difficult times. This is the role that we've been playing in order to come out of the pandemic in a better situation than when we entered it. I believe that the working conditions and precariousness are topics that must interest us increasingly and be part of our daily work in the future as well. During the pandemic, we've also managed to negotiate a number of important agreements, particularly regarding riders who've been declared essential workers, and this has allowed people to receive services in their homes, which in other circumstances they would have had to go and look for themselves. In this sense, I believe that we've played a very important role and our work has been essential, and this is the case across Europe. Thank you, everyone.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much, everybody, for all these comments, which are extremely interesting. We're now going to listen to Jennifer Baker once more for an overview of the opinion of our assistants. Jennifer, over to you.
Yes, quite a few things worth mentioning that are happening digitally as you're following the live feed. There's a lot happening in the background. First of all, I want to mention here this publication from Uni Global, Key Trade Union Principles for Ensuring Workers' Rights When Working Remotely. Very important topic now, especially with COVID-19. So do check that out. It's published there on Twitter. You can easily find it following the hashtag #UniEuropaForward. So please share that. Share it on your other social media. use the hashtag. Now, we're going to come back to our hub. One of the more recent comments was from Susanna in Switzerland, talking about digitalization and skills and the gap between older people and younger people in using these new technologies. I hope you're getting a fast lesson in the couple of days here today on our program. Since we're talking about digital, I will refer you to another one of our petitions that's in the Resource Centre. This one is Reclaim Your Face. This is about trying to stamp out biometric identification so that employers can't track you wherever you go using your face. So some concerns there around digital technology and its uses. But let's come back here over to our Join the Conversation. This is our key centre for people discussing what's going on. Lots of people making plenty of comments there. We have coming in from Spain, from Italy, from Fernando in Spain is saying that the centrality of work and the recognition of its importance means valuing the public social safety nets and the role of the state, a service provider and a guarantor of fair and equitable economic and fiscal policies. Thank you, Fernando, for that comment. Martin in Austria saying, we have been demanding the 35-hour week with full wage compensation for a long time in Austria, but the employers have not yet understood that this also brings them a lot. There's a few different points of opinion on the minimum wage discussions. Erika in Finland says that she doesn't think the minimum wage would actually resolve correcting women's low wages. She thinks, well, it would justify keeping them low, but there's a bit of debate on that. So make sure you follow that here through this panel here. This is Join the Conversation. You can absolutely see what's going on here. We want you to do that. We also see then on remote work, Yel Dont from Belgium says absolutely urgent attention to work materials and ergonomics is needed in this area. And of course, you can read that in the report as well. Yel says also tackle the inconsistencies in working hours. Suddenly, you can't do extra work if you work at home or need to do work which is registered and only recognized in an office. It's a really tricky situation for a lot of people. And I'm really glad to see here Domenico is saying that in Italian law, the remote work possibility for employers to settle economic contracts through individual bargaining, bypassing collective bargaining. I won't go through all of it, but please do go there and read. And you can, in fact, I should have said, you can like, if you want to like the comments. Domenico, we're going to like your comment. And of course, you can follow on and comment on other people. So we'll develop threads throughout these days that you can go back and look through and read the whole conversation. But I think that's enough of this for now. Pilar, we'll go back to you, but I will be joining in again from the media wall in a very short time.
Gracias, Jennifer, y qué interesante.
Thank you, Jennifer, and how interesting all this participation on the net. I'd now like to call in Mario Petito from the CISL trade union, which will give us a summary of this interesting session. Mario, over to you. Thank you very much, Pilar. During this session, we tackled one of the largest fractures in society, the pandemic and the crisis brought on by COVID-19. This distortion might not have been so visible as the fights waged by previous generations. However, it is extremely deep and its consequences are extreme. Allow me to summarize briefly the key points of today's discussion. Being an essential worker and therefore in the front line during the pandemic means being the basis of our society, which means these people deserve more through collective bargaining and further rights, because if it doesn't happen now, then when? Service workers are always in the front line. Our work is to always be in touch with clients, they say, and we therefore risk our lives, as has happened for many colleagues in Europe. Workers who apparently have worked in the services risk high levels of stress and isolation, whereas the new working methods, such as remote working, could provide further liberties to workers. Some companies are using the pandemic as an excuse to make more people redundant through dramatic processes of restructuring that are not linked to managing the pandemic. Meanwhile, they're using public resources from recovery funds at national level to satisfy their stakeholders. As my colleague Barbara Taber said earlier on, the COVID-19 cannot be a license to exploit workers. We can't allow for the COVID-19 crisis to become an opportunity for large businesses to make even more money. Recovery funds at national level must also benefit workers and citizens. Restructuring processes have accelerated not at the speed of light, but at the speed of even further speed, the worst situations. This is called the new normal. But for it to be normal, we must take account of workers. We need a transition that is inclusive in this new way of working. As our colleague Erwin de Wijn declared on the Resolutions Committee, this crisis is a fracture in our society, a fracture that reveals the precariousness of service workers. And our joint reply must be clear. We need further recognition so that our voices are heard, recognition through collective bargaining, and through collective bargaining, we must promote new advantages for our workers. Thank you.
Gracias, Mario, por esta
Thank you, Mario, for this excellent summary. It is now time to proceed to the vote on the emergency motion relative to the COVID-19 crisis. Once more, I'd like to remind you that you can vote in favor, against, or abstain. So please cast your votes.
Now, while you're voting there, we're going to have another look at what's happening on social media. We can see here a lot going on Twitter, of course, everyone using that hashtag UniEuropaFWD. Not only is that a great way to tag it, but it's also, if you want to go and quickly find something, you can do a search for that on social media. We can see here, Jana is saying that the union movement is built by brave workers. On Workers' Memorial Day, workers over the world will take the time to honour the memory of colleagues who have been killed at work or have died from a work-related illness. Really strong and important points being made there on social media. Let's come back over here, however, to our hub. I want to show you another tool. In case you missed anything yesterday, you can go to the Watch It Again section, where you will see here videos of what's been happening yesterday. Recordings available within 24 hours in our few main languages here, English, French, Dutch, German. You can go through that and have a look. So there's no need to miss out on anything. And of course, there's no need to miss out in anything in the discussion either. You can, of course, go to the join the conversation, comment on people's things, read through the threads. What you also can do then is, of course, have your delegation chat. Find your colleagues, find your comrades who are in different countries and maybe continue a discussion one-on-one with them. There's no need to continue all in the public discussion if you want to have private chats. Once again, I will remind you about our exhibition stands. This is another place where you can set up meetings with specific individuals at a time in the future. You don't have to just go straight to the immediate on-the-spot chat. Go again, do the exhibition stands. We'll have a look there. We've got an awful lot of various options. You can scroll left and right. So if you think you haven't been seen, just keep using the arrows to scroll through. I know they don't all appear on the homepage, but they are all there. So just go looking for them and finding them. I think now we have the results of that vote in. So I'll hand back to you, Pilar, to give us those.
No. Bueno, pues parece que la moción de urgencia.
Well, apparently, the emergency motion is adopted. So, congratulations. Before the lunch break, we're very pleased to present Stu Art Dance, performing at the studio in Brussels, who have prepared a dance for this occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Bueno, pues un gran aplauso para estos artistas de Stuart.
A huge applause for these artists for this beautiful dance to conclude this session. But before we take our lunch break, I'd like a round of applause for us all and the team for organizing the votes, which were presented yesterday and today, and all the motions that were adopted. So a round of applause. We'll now take a lunch break and we'll be coming back at 2 p.m. and I'll be handing over the floor to my colleague.